Hello and welcome to the third part of Building Bridges Towards LGBT Equality in the Workplace, exploring lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender issues. My name is Daniel Lawrence Smith, Associate Director of Training at Out and Equal Workplace Advocates, and I'm joined today by Pat Bailey, Director of Training and Professional Development at Out and Equal. That's who we are. We'd like to hear who is on the call. So I'm going to go ahead first and unmute Amanda, if you can share who you are, where you work, and again, why you're interested in taking the course with us today.
Hi, I work for Brown Brothers Harriman. Again, my name is Amanda Reeves. I've been here for 8 years and been doing diversity and leadership work for 16, going on 17 years now. I'm on the call because I'm looking for new and interesting ways to make sure that we are building bridges wherever necessary.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. And Nancy, how about you?
Hi, I'm Nancy Mace. I am an independent consultant and also a senior consultant with Jennifer Brown Consulting, a leadership and inclusion consulting firm. I have a career of more years than I want to put on number two at this point in all avenues of HR, including OD and learning and development, and the last 5 or so years have been focused on diversity and inclusion, including a stint on staff at Out and Equal. And I'm here just sharpening up my skills so that when I'm out there doing work with clients, I'm giving them the best information possible.
Thank you, Nancy. And Chaz.
Hi, my name is Cesar Valek. I am a global fellow at Out and Equal currently, but I'm also chairman of Prague Pride. And I'm interested of taking the course because it's a first step to take a Train the Trainers course, which I would like to take in order to make those Out and Equal trainings available for the Czech companies.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for sharing that. All of you, and for being on the call with us today. As Chaz mentioned, our Train the Trainer course will be coming up in May, and this Building Bridges series is a prerequisite for that. So a little bit of an overview. Again, this is our third session. So in our first session together, we went over key concepts for cultural competency, LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. In our second session, we went over the business case, why it makes good business sense for companies to create a diverse and inclusive workforce. And then today, we're going to go into the role of an ally, and then talk about some action planning, next steps that can be used to take back to your company or organization. But before we begin that, let's spend a little bit of time and review what we've already spoken on. Again, we went into key concepts, talking about sexual orientation, who we're attracted to physically, emotionally, romantically. Assigned birth sex, the doctor determines sex at birth, male, female, or intersex. Gender expression, one's internal sense of gender, being male, female, or if you're born a gender that doesn't match how you feel inside, being a transgender individual. Okay. Also, gender fluid or bigender and agender. And then we spoke about gender expression, our outward expression through clothing, hairstyle, voice, and mannerisms of what social norms would determine masculine, feminine, androgynous, or nonconforming. So let's spend some time and review those with a brief quiz. So our first definition here is internal sense of being male, female, or something in between. And which of these do you feel would be an internal sense of male, female, or something in between? Go ahead and put in your answers and hit submit. Great, and we're at 100%. So gender identity, internal sense of being male, female, or something in between. Wonderful. And we've got one more for you. How one represents or expresses their gender identity to others, a combination of behavior, dress, hairstyles, voice, or body characteristics. Which one of these goes along with that? And then hit submit. Great, and that's gender expression. Good, there's no fooling this crowd. And last but not least, feels love, affection, and sexual attraction regardless of gender. Which one of these would best define that? Okay, right. And so the answer is bisexual. And we used to look at bisexual saying attraction to male and female, but we now say regardless of gender, so that we're thinking outside of that gender binary. And thank you, Veet, for joining. I see that you're online. Thank you so much. So we spent some time talking about the Out and Equal 20 steps to workplace equality. And there are 5 main pillars with that, talking about equal policies and benefits, talent management and professional development, the workplace climate, community commitment, and then advocacy and corporate responsibility. And many of these pillars also fall in line with the HRC Corporate Equality Index. So looking at best practices for companies so that they can promote equality within their organization, but then also send that broader message out to the business community, saying that they are creating fair practices for all of their employees. And then when we think about the different policies and benefits that can be put in place, we look at our Out and Equal advocacy frontier. Okay, and what we used to see is, if we look in the bottom left-hand corner, these are the really fundamental values that companies should hold, making sure that they have sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression listed within their employment policies. And then as we begin to look outward, we see all of the expansion of things that companies are now beginning to do, which is becoming more and more the norm for companies, looking at LGBT recruitment and monitoring that, okay, supporting LGBT organizations, okay, making sure that you're having a global view, so the policies that you have in place for your United States citizens also works when you're doing relocation to countries that might not have the workplace climate in place. And we have another quiz for you here. So does your company include gender identity and expression within its non-discrimination policy? And go ahead and put in your answer here. Okay, so I see 3 of you say yes, both on identity and expression. 2 who don't know, that's fine, a little bit of homework for you there, and 1 non-applicable, thank you. And here's our next quiz. Does your company have an LGBT employee or business resource group? Does your company have an LGBT employee or business resource group? Okay, and so about half and half. 3 are saying yes, 3 are saying not applicable, and I think the not applicable might apply to the nonprofit folks here as well as independent contractors, but good to see that the people that are in corporate environments do have an employee resource group in place. So thank you all for participating there. We're now going to dive into our subject for the day, talking about the role of allies, okay? How we can be allies to our LGBT colleagues, to the friends and family of our LGBT colleagues, but really to send that broader message that everyone should feel comfortable bringing their full and authentic selves to the workplace. And we're going to begin by a video that was produced by our good friends at ESPN, talking about their ally engagement. The sound might be a little muffled for this, so I'll turn it up as much as I can, and here we go.
And Daniel, I'll put my microphone on it. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you, Pat.
My name is Trey Wingo. I'm an ESPN commentator, a truly horrible golfer, a football freak, and a serial optimist. I'm also an ally.
I'm a friend.
Mother.
I'm an obedient husband.
Son.
I am a father.
I'm a godparent.
I'm a daughter.
I'm a brother of a gay man.
Nerd.
New York City native.
I'm a traveler.
A coach.
An enthusiastic yoga practitioner.
An AmeriCorps alum.
I'm a runner.
I'm a female athlete. My favorite team is the Oakland Raiders. No jokes, please.
I am a soccer fan, Manchester City.
I'm an Auburn Tiger football fan.
I'm a long-suffering Washington, D.C. area sports fan who now has hope.
I always root for the underdog.
I'm straight.
I'm gay.
I'm an out lesbian.
I'm
I'm an ally.
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 Allies of ESPN Equal consist of employees who identify as heterosexual and have joined in a commitment to help foster a workplace where LGBT employees are accepted, included, and supported. Allies believe that people should be treated equally and with dignity and respect. An ally is not someone with all the answers to LGBT issues. An ally is someone who is committed to learning and educating
Daniel, I think we're
others
having
to
a
help
little bit of a
create a
buffering
work
problem, so
environment
there we go.
that is free of homophobia and heterosexism.
A straight ally in the workplace is somebody who stands up for an LGBT employee when they hear a comment that's homophobic.
I think it's really important to have allies in the workplace. I feel very blessed that I came to ESPN as an openly gay female,
seems like we're
and I've been
having another bit
accepted
of
with
a
open
buffering
arms at
problem.
ESPN.
Wendy and I have known each other for almost 25 years. We started practicing law together, and she has told me that I was her first ally, which I was honored to hear.
An ally will allow me to celebrate the things that are important in my partnership.
There you go, Daniel. We're good.
Okay, and it's a shame that we lost the audio on that. It is a really great video, and I'll send out the link to it right after this. But it goes on for about 7 minutes or so. Very, very impactful, and it was part of the process of ESPN to be very visible in the way that they were running their ally program and a part of a push to gain more allies for their employee resource group. And a lot of well-known sports people and individuals that you might not necessarily associate with being an ally, supporting their colleagues in a very visible and vocal way, talking about being the father of a lesbian daughter, talking about being out within their organization. So very, very great to see, and I'll send the link out to that right afterward. But we want to think about why allies are important. We know that allies have an opportunity to help change the workplace, particularly in environments where it might not be as accepting to be out as somebody who is lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, but easier to be out as somebody who supports their LGBT colleagues. Because allies have an opportunity to speak up to support workplace equality and to educate their fellow coworkers. Again, with the mindset that many individuals who are allies have close relations to somebody who is LGBT. But there are different scales within our ally continuum. And think for a moment how you would rate yourself. The very first step would be being aware, okay, that knowledge base that someone might have situations or circumstances in their life which don't necessarily line up with what societal norms would tell us to be. Okay, the next is ally, making sure that you're a friend, having the conversations to get to know somebody within the workplace, because we know when we know each other more and we share those stories, we also work better together. And the next step is an advocate, okay, being that vocal voice of change, joining the employee resource group within your company or organization, okay, stepping up and speaking out if you hear something derogatory said, misguided joke, or perhaps fear, homophobia, or transphobia. So different ways that we can go about within our ally continuum. Take a moment to think for yourself where you would put yourself within that spectrum. With that, I'm going to hand it back over to Pat.
Great. And Daniel, it looks like we've got a couple of folks who've joined us since we checked in. So Elise, I'm going to unmute you. I want you to introduce yourself real quick, who you work with for, and why you're taking the class again. You might be on mute on your own machine there, Elise. Okay, well, we'll come back to you in a little bit there. Vit, you also signed in, so why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh, great. Well, hi, I'm from Prague Pride. I do PR for Prague Pride, and the reason I'm joining in on this is because we have several projects outside of Pride that we are trying to do, and one of them is like educating others in how to deal with LGBT in various contexts.
Great, thanks, Vit. Glad you joined us. And again, you know, the sessions are recorded, so we'll have them available for you, so you can listen to them if you missed any part of it starting from the beginning. So when we're talking about those three levels, awareness, which is a lot of what we did in the first session, talking about concepts, terminology, just being aware of what the business case issues are, what LGBT employees deal with. And then you begin to say, well, how do I kind of learn how to speak up or, you know, be an ally, or how do I intervene when a joke is being done, and all of those areas. And then how do I become an advocate? How do I think about this and make sure it programmatically fits into the areas and organizations that I'm with? But the first thing we have to change with is ourselves, and how do we change? So there's levels that we do this. There's things that we think, and we talked a little bit about that unconscious bias and that amygdala in the back of the head that gives you a response right away based on what you see in the environment and the amount of information that you process that way versus the limited amount of information that comes to your attention and is in your conscious mind. So that process of going from unconscious response to thinking, and then how we feel about that. What's our sense of how we're responding to that? Is it a good feeling? Is it a bad feeling? Are we concerned, afraid, mad, angry? But the step that we see in the workplace, that's the important part, no matter what happens kind of in the background in the brain as we're thinking and processing this information, is what we do. And so that's what we're going to take a look at how we do some of those changes. And then secondly, that change, once we get beyond the personal level, then becomes interpersonal. How do I interact with other people? Am I comfortable talking with someone who's transgender or bisexual? And then how do I begin to build those relationships on my team and in my community? That starts to then build as a team becomes more aware into the institutional. How does your work group work with each other, understand each other, accept those dimensions of diversity, and then finally that begins to spread out to the entire company. Now, obviously, in lots of locations geographically, that becomes sometimes challenging, and you see that maybe at the headquarters those conversations are much more comfortable and they're happening. Where somewhere maybe, as we've been using our example in Kansas, that might be a little more difficult to have those. But if it's a cultural and company value, that institution starts to change, and then as that changes and companies are present and those discussions and community members are there living in cities and counties and states, we start to see that cultural change. So that's kind of the process that we move through that. But let's start back at that step one. What are some of the things that you may think about? And these are neither good or bad, but it just talks about what are some of the things that might be that kind of heterosexism or unconsciousness about when we talk about that, when we don't see other people. We talked about the heterosexism. When I meet other people, I assume they're my same orientation. I can talk about my spouse and not worry about a reaction at work. I can share stories and information. It's amazing sometimes. I had a friend of mine who went to the University of Utah as a lesbian, and there was something on the paperwork that said you cannot be a homosexual, and she was on a scholarship, and she had to sign it. She goes, well, I'll go back in the closet for the years because I need to get my degree, and it's in therapy and psychology, and I just won't say anything and won't be who I was. And at one point, she had a student who came to her in therapy, was talking about being a lesbian and being out and in first love and was all excited. And she wasn't sure how to deal with this student in terms of living in Utah and how to counsel her. And so she went to her professor, who was the head of the department, and sat down and talked with him about, how do I deal with this? And the professor said, well, I never talk about my family and I never do any of this kind of thing. And at that moment, she realized that she was going to come out to her professor and say, well, I'm a lesbian, and you do, in fact, talk about your family. When you're lecturing in class, you talk about family situations, and you use your wife and your children. And I see these pictures on your desk, and I see a woman with you in a happy tropical environment, which I assume is your wife, and I see your kids there, so I assume you're a practicing heterosexual. And so those awarenesses came in, and it was a challenge. She was able to complete her degree and graduate. But again, when we think about being able to have those conversations and sharing our lives, that it's there, and a lot of times we don't realize that privilege that we have of being able to share that without being worried. Another aspect is where you live. If you're moving and relocating on the job, where you live and where is it going to be accepting of a same-sex couple, or are we going to have responses from people in the neighborhoods that we're going to live in? When I watch TV, I see others that look like me. Now, this is changing more. We're beginning to see more and more TV and kind of the ESPN ad and discussion on allies. We're starting to see this happening, but it's still, a lot of times you may not see a lot of people who look like you or in situations that are always positive and uplifting. You can easily adopt children, and you don't have to worry about your children seeing images of your type of family in school. So those are things that just kind of happen as you go through life that you may not think about. Also that you can get hired, insurance and coverage, without worrying about who you are and should I reveal the fact that I have a partner. Being able to show affection. It's been interesting with the park and rides that you have when you get dropped off to go to transit systems, a lot of times you'll see a husband and wife, and they'll kiss each other as they leave, opposite-sex couple. And then you'll see a same-sex couple, and that'll happen too. And with women, there's not so much a response, but there's a much stronger response if it's two men kissing each other goodbye. And that's, again, that's all what's kind of happening in our brain and what we feel and what our responses are. But it's just, what are we used to seeing? What are we expecting to see? Realizing that you're not defined strictly by your sexual behavior. Being LGBT is not about just what you do in the bedroom. There's much more than that. And a lot of times people try to say, well, we aren't going to talk about that in the workplace. Where, again, when we talk about our family, our goals, our beliefs, and our dreams, that's a lot of what we do in the workplace as we get to know each other. Never being asked, as someone who's heterosexual, to speak for the entire straight community. You know, what do you straight people think? Although I'd been asked that many times in my job when I was down in New Mexico, and that was my first place after the military that I was out and visible. And that you never have to worry about with your family that you can join them if there's medical issues. I take my marriage license with me when we travel to make sure that if my partner gets checked into the hospital, I can prove I have a right to be there and that I'm family. I'm not sure that if you're heterosexual, you think about that when you go on vacation. Are there any others that you can think of? If you want to chat in some areas that you might come up in your mind that you're not aware of, that might not be looking and seeing those LGBT individuals? I'll give everybody a minute now. I see that Nancy had a question about connecting Prague Pride up with Robin Terrell, who's living there now. That's a good connection. So this is part of what this program does, is it finds you and connects that. So keep thinking about that if you've got some other thoughts or ideas. Media is another area. Commercials. We're seeing more and more commercials come out with LGBT individuals, but we are not necessarily always seeing them all across in all sectors for that. And I see Ruben is coming in and joining us. Hi, Ruben. Welcome. We see you just joined us. Ruben, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself real quickly? Are you there, Ruben? Okay, Ruben, I'm going to put you on mute right now. So the question, Nancy asked me to ask the question again. Are there other areas where, as we go through this list, that you think about, wow, I never thought about that for myself? Maybe when I go to church or, you know, when I'm in the community, do I see a couple and do I respond if they're a same-sex couple? Just unconscious things that you may not think about or expect in your community that come up that make you stop and think, that you notice, that gets past that unconscious bias filter. Okay, Ruben says that his mic doesn't work, so he can't introduce himself on that. Okay, well, we'll keep going with that, and then what I want to do is talk about the impact of that. And Daniel, hang on, I'm going to have to cough here for a second. Okay, so I'm fighting a bit of a cold, and coughing comes along once in a while. But so the impact of these thoughts, as we react and we respond to things that are different, can come out in the shape of homophobia. And you can see here that can talk about violence or discrimination, job loss, your family rejects you. We hear about a lot of homeless LGBT youth whose families have turned them away. Pressure to get married, prison time, living lives that have a different alternative. And Daniel, I think you're going to have to take this one. I'm going to have to stop and cough.
No problem, Pat. So speaking about homophobia and just the impact that that mindset can have on the lives of individuals, recognizing that there could be an opportunity for less education, lower productivity, okay, so that if you're having negative circumstances in your life, that you're not going to be as productive and successful within your workplace environment and with your career aspirations as well, and how that can also have an impact on your financial security, how much you're earning, okay, whether or not you are above or below the poverty level, and also the impact that can have within your personal health, okay, recognizing that there are lower economic output for LGBT individuals, okay, and fewer incentives to invest in human capital.
Okay, Daniel, I'm back. I'm going to try again. So now we think about not what you just think, but what you feel. What's your response when you see someone who's LGBT? Do you have a stronger response if you see someone who's bisexual, transgender, if it's a man, what I talked about the situation in the parking lot, thinking that you can spot one? It's like, oh, I can tell and pick out someone who's gay anytime, and I know that. But we saw with our terminology and concepts that that's not true in a lot of cases. Thinking that if a lesbian, if you're a female, or a gay man, if you're male, is making sexual advances if they touch you. They come up to your office, they lean over your shoulder, you put their hand on your shoulder. If that's not comfortable for you in any situation, then that's one thing. But if it's because it's the same-sex person doing it and you know that they're lesbian or gay, then where is that response coming from and what's that feeling? Being repulsed by LGBT public displays of affection. Thinking that LGBT people are too outspoken about civil rights. Again, we kind of, as we talked through the business case, we had a lot of examples of why that business and workplace equality isn't happening for a lot of LGBT employees. So a lot of people think, well, you've already got all your rights, you're already protected, what's the big deal, why are you continuing to have this discussion, and always talking about these LGBT issues. And that's because for many of us it impacts our families and our lives and our jobs as we go that. Assuming that all LGBT are sexually active. Feeling that discussions on homophobia and heterosexism aren't necessary in the workplace. I hear a lot of times when I work with a company is, oh, we're all really good with LGBT people, we don't have any issues. And then I get into a class and we start to talk about some of these issues, and questions and comments come up that indicate people really haven't thought through that process yet. Assuming everyone you meet is heterosexual, feeling that a lesbian just wants to be a man or a gay man wants to be a woman, again, mixing those concepts, just those feelings and sense of, like, I don't understand this, I don't know how it works. Worrying about the impact an LGBT coworker will have on your work. We've had situations on work teams where people have said, I don't want to work with them because the customer's not comfortable with LGBT and it's going to impact my job and my work. Those are moments when managers have to step in and say, we have non-discrimination and we continue to do that. And assuming that someone who's lesbian or gay would be heterosexual if given an opportunity. So those, again, just reactions and feelings that we have. And if any of those strike you and say, wow, I thought about that, again, thinking and feelings are not wrong. There's no problem with that. It's part of what we've learned through our culture and our lives, our families, our social groups, our communities. And that, but being aware of that is that first step. And once you become aware of that and you think about that and go, wow, okay, that's kind of a heterosexist kind of view, or that maybe there's a little homophobia or biphobia or transphobia engaged in that. What can I do about that? What can I support? What can I do? These are some of the things that can indicate, if your actions step in, that you're not supportive and you haven't gotten to that awareness or your ally kind of level. If a coworker has a breakup and you don't feel like you want to support them, like that's just because of the lifestyle that they live. Literally standing up and changing your seat in a meeting. If you know someone's a lesbian, they walk in and you stand up and move your seat, that's a very clear body language cue that you're not comfortable with them. How you use the terms lesbian, gay, bi, and trans. There's a tone that you can say, and that obviously comes across as a sense of how you're feeling about it. So it's not the words that are the problem, it's how you say it and the tone. Not asking about a woman's girlfriend or a partner or a man's boyfriend or partner. I've seen supervisors do that where they'll go around the room, hey, what'd you do this weekend? How's the wife? How's the kids? They get to the lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender person, and they go, hi, how you doing? Glad you're here, and kind of skip over them, kind of like they don't want to open up that discussion. And that definitely for the employee feels like they're not being included in the conversation. Not confronting a homophobic remark for fear of being identified with or as LGBT, and we'll talk about that in a little bit in a moment. Asking your colleagues to speak only on LGBT issues and not other issues. Are there other areas that you've seen either in the workplace or in the community that you see kind of say, ouch, You go, that wasn't a really good culturally comment moment. So go ahead and chat those in. I'll give you a minute to do that. So again, these may not necessarily be things that you've done. It might be, but that's okay. But situations that you've seen somebody react or respond or do something that if there was you as LGBT or having the awareness of it that there might be LGBT individuals in there that they might respond to. It says people auto-assuming that you're attracted to them because they're male and you're gay. Right. And it's interesting, I always kind of share the story with that around women, if a guy comes on to you, we learn very early what to do, especially in the workplace. No, thank you. Here's my boundaries. Please stop that. And for many men, they've never learned that. And so we hear this a lot from men about, well, this guy was looking at me in the locker room or in the gym, and, as we were working on the team, and it made me really uncomfortable. Sometimes it's about not assuming that you are being attractive to everyone. And so men need to learn some of those same tricks and talents that women have used for years in terms of how to divert attentions if they come that way. And to remember that those are inappropriate in the workplace. So if that's not welcome and you say no and it continues, that LGBT person is just as wrong as someone who continues to make advances on women in the workplace when they've said no. Amanda shared, I've experienced people assuming that they couldn't have anything in common with an LGBTQ person. Right, like I didn't go to Pride or I didn't go to the bars this weekend. I can't talk to them, but maybe we did gardening this weekend and we could talk about that. So finding those common ground discussions are really, really important on that. Great, some good inputs with that. Just a couple of guidelines. Nancy mentions, I didn't notice that someone transitioning had sent me an email with their new name, Stephanie, not Stefan, and I used it in a group email, which caused her enormous anxiety about being outed to people. Right, I totally get that. That's a lot of times those subtle cues are being sent to us, and we don't see them, and we don't read into them. So that's a good practical workplace issue with that. Again, for each employee, it's their story to tell, and so you want to make sure that you provide them that opportunity to be able to tell their story when they feel comfortable, when they feel safe. So good attention with that. Some guidelines that we've for changing your thinking. Again, they're going to come up. You're going to react. Thinking about that when you meet someone, they could be LGBT or heterosexual. See that whole person. Make sure that you do ask about what are your hobbies, what do you do, are there important people in your life? Open-ended questions that people can begin to talk about that. Educating yourself with courses like this and being able to have conversations. Realize that how a person looks doesn't reflect how they feel. I mentioned my friend who transitioned later in life after going to a women's college, and when you looked at that person before transition, you would have never said that this person is even lesbian, gay, bisexual, or would say, why are you transitioning to a man? I can't see that in you. But yet that was the feeling that she had inside, was that her gender identity didn't match her assigned birth sex, and when she transitioned to him, it became very important and very clear that that was the right place for that person to be. And so it's one of those things that don't make those assumptions that you can tell. Don't assume that LGBT people are suffering. And then recognize there's intersections and similarities around prejudice and bias and discrimination in other communities, people of color. Not the same issues by any means at all, but that we have a common ground that we can begin to understand and have empathy for each other and begin to be more active allies. You know, men can be allies for women. White people can be allies for people of color. Able-bodied people for the disability community can step up and do that. So there's lots of good opportunities to look across the isms and make a difference across those intersections. Look at changing your behaviors and actions. Use gender-inclusive and non-heterosexist language. You know, maybe ask those questions. What's your preferred pronouns on your team? Just to start the discussion of what that's about. Make sure you're not teasing, harassing, or engaging in any jokes or comments or slurs, even if it's fun. A lot of times, and one of the things, you don't necessarily see it in the workplace, but in community groups, you'll see LGBT people making jokes about themselves and parodying themselves, and you feel like, well, I can kind of join in on this. But again, that kind of sends an image to people that are around that that's the way you feel about yourself. So, be very careful of those as LGBT in the workplace doing any of that, but then as an ally of not joining in and just being part of the crowd. Definitely, as Nancy's story kind of shared, don't out individuals. Think before you speak. Sometimes you just have to stop and say, I'm not going to say the first thing that comes into my mind. I'm going to think about this and figure out what's the right way to say that, what my feelings are, and engage in those inclusive practices. So kind of in summary, we looked at those levels of changes that kind of happen. And as we worked a lot on the personal and interpersonal piece of that individual example and you making a difference and you taking a stand, speaking out, asking questions, making sure the workplace is inclusive, leads to that cultural and institutional changes. Now there's a quote up here, it says, from Tolstoy, it says, everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. How would you make that quote inclusive? So go ahead and type that in and say, when I read that as a woman, I go, okay, we're talking about men, so I'm not going to pay attention to what great words might be in there. What could you say instead and change in that to make it include everyone? I'll give you a second to read that. Okay, Nancy said changing themselves. So the comment could be, everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing themselves. So again, now that includes everyone, not just male identifying with himself. So those are simple ways that you can start to talk and speak and be able to share in your language that shows inclusion without necessarily having to come out and say, hey, I'm an ally, I support LGBT individuals. We should think of changing ourselves, just good. Because one of the things that happens when we begin to speak up and do this is we all come out. And this is one of the areas where we talked about coming out as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender in the process and how important that is. But allies also have to think about that too. Because when you speak up and you say, hey, don't make that comment, or that's not cool, or you shouldn't make those kind of jokes in the workplace, many, many times what we see is someone will turn around and say, hey, Pat, I didn't realize you were a lesbian. I thought you were straight. And then you hear the response from someone who's an ally go, well, I'm not LGBT, but I'm straight, but I support. And you hear that kind of the but in there. And what we found is that you're almost like the response that when I talk to allies and a lot of the work that PFLAG has done is that you're trying to justify, yeah, but I'm not part of that group, so I'm still part of that majority and, the folks that have the privilege, so I'm just speaking up for the group. So think about that if somebody says, yeah, but I thought you were straight, but I didn't realize that you were LGBT. I'm just a strong supporter of LGBT equality without having to identify yourself. And if you do have to identify yourself, and I believe as a heterosexual that it's important that we all speak up. So that and is a much better word to connect that instead of but. So it's a very subtle difference, but it is about an ally. And for many men especially, we see the difficulty in coming out and speaking up as an ally because they're afraid their friends are going to say, hey, I didn't know you were gay. And that sometimes silences them. So one of the things we can do is think about where we can be that ally. We can, in team meetings and customer conferences, phone calls, in our lab, in our office, in our break room, if we're going on a group lunch outing and there are LGBT individuals coming, or let's say that you're going shopping and you meet one of your coworkers with their family in the market and they're a same-sex couple, don't hide and run behind the stalls and do that. Meet them and say, wow, this is really great. How old are your kids? Here's my kids. Sharing those lives, because that is how you begin to move from that awareness of I know what's going on. There's a saying in unconscious bias is that you can never unsee what you've seen. And so now that you've had this course, you're going to see more of this in the community, and you're going to say, how do I respond to this? How do I react? How do I be an ally? And it's an opportunity all the time to be aware. Now, you don't have to be an ally or an advocate 100% of the time. There's sometimes you just go, I can't do that today. So let's, I'm going to put up a culturally competent lines here. talking about the following statements and how they reflect cultural competency if you're talking about marriage equality to someone who is LGBT. Now, what I want you to do, if you're going to rank these, 1 is the lowest cultural competency. If you heard it, you go, ouch. 5 is probably a good line. So there's 5 lines there. You've got kids need a mother and a father. Love is love. Congratulations. I can't believe you never got married. Marriage is no big deal. Everybody should get married. So go ahead and rank those 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest, least culturally competent, 5 being the highest, and go ahead and submit those. And we've got a few responses coming in. And again, this is just as you hear them in your mind, which one feels the best, the worst, and that you might respond to some of them if they came up. And let me get my votes in here. We'll give everybody just a minute to vote on that. Okay, so it looks like the lowest rated from the group, and I know you just see the people responded, but I have a chart here that tells me the averages. The lowest rated one is kids need a mother and a father. That got an average of 2.33. The next lowest one was I can't believe you never married. Let me change that now. Marriage is no big deal is now the next lowest one. Got 2.83. I can't believe you never married is 2.66. The scores are changing there a little bit. And it looks like the 2 best things to say, based on our review of this, is everybody should get married and love is love. Congratulations. So again, you're starting to hear the words, you're starting to hear the comments, you're starting to respond to them. Some of them are in the middle. You go, well, maybe I'm not going to say anything about that, but that didn't feel quite right. How would I say it differently? But again, thinking about your own process, if you were going to say something to somebody, maybe the first thing is, I can't believe you never got married, but maybe the best thing to say is everybody should get married. And congratulations, love is love. So just beginning to work through that process and thinking through that is good. So, all right. So, Daniel, I'm going to turn it back over to you now for what not to say.
Thank you, Pat. So let's think about some things that we might not want to say to our LGBT colleagues. The first would be you have a conversation and your colleague comes out to you and says, I'm gay. Of course I knew you were gay, duh. Obviously, I suspected you were gay all along. It would be more, thank you for sharing, tell me more about your life, not I suspected you were gay. Again, with that notion that we can't necessarily spot somebody who is LGBT. Second, you wouldn't want to say you're sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry, that must be so difficult and challenging for you. Okay, again, not assuming that every LGBT person is suffering. The question, why did you tell me that? This goes back to our water cooler scenario. People sharing what they did over the weekend. My wife and I went to the beach. We had a lovely time. Just sharing part of your life. Not necessarily assuming that they're sharing their sexual orientation. Really, they're just sharing an aspect of their life with you. For someone who is transgender, asking which bathroom they use, certainly not an appropriate workplace question, and also lacks that sensitivity component. Saying, we're not close enough for you to share that information with me. This goes back to Pat's example earlier of the picture on the desk of the husband and wife on the beach together. So not necessarily being close enough, again, just disclosing an aspect of your life. Certainly you would want to avoid referring to coworkers as she-male, again, not an appropriate terminology under any circumstances. And asking what someone likes to do in bed wouldn't be an appropriate question for one of your heterosexual colleagues and wouldn't be an appropriate question for any of your colleagues for that matter. So all terms that we would want to avoid and not say when speaking to somebody who is LGBT within the workplace. Let's think about some different jokes or negative comments that we might associate with homophobia, transphobia, or biphobia, and I'll read through these. So different circumstances that could happen if somebody makes a joke about the LGBT community, okay? somebody making comment about an LGBT news story that's on the TV in the break room, and we know that LGBT is reflected quite heavily right now within news and media stories, so that's a very likely scenario that could happen. Okay, if someone is staring or pointing to an LGBT couple at an event, perhaps you're at a work holiday party and somebody comes in with their same-sex partner or spouse and somebody making a spectacle of that. More an act of an aggression, somebody who knocks over a wedding picture of an LGBT employee on their desk. Okay, somebody is upset that there's a man in the women's restroom. Okay, so talking about gender identity and access to facilities. Pat used the example earlier of moving your seat in a meeting so that you're not sitting next to somebody who is LGBT. Okay, so not wanting to be associated with the LGBT colleague, maybe because of fear that someone would think that you, in fact, are LGBT. Okay, somebody making a negative comment or tearing down a Pride event poster, perhaps a poster for an employee resource group related event. Somebody bullying or teasing another employee, or acts of physical aggression. And we see that some of these are more subtle acts of homophobia, transphobia, or biphobia, but others are really much more aggressive and could actually endanger the life of the LGBT employee, or certainly their personal safety and well-being. So with that, now what? If one of these scenarios were to happen and you were in that situation, what might your first thought be, okay, and how would you respond to that? Okay, so first you need to analyze what's going on within your own mind, okay? And then, is there a way that you can make this a teaching moment, okay? So you hear a negative joke or a negative comment made about that news article in the break room. How can you use that as a moment to educate your fellow colleagues as an ally, and what would your next steps be with that? And again, it can be that notion of, I don't agree with that comment, and I support all of our colleagues, including our LGBT coworkers. Okay, so it's at that point that you have an opportunity to come out as an ally. And what we know is a lot of the coming out as an ally process is that peer-to-peer educational moment. So thinking that if you, as their valued colleague, also want equal protections and policies for your LGBT colleagues, that perhaps if you're thinking that way, maybe I should rethink the way that I'm thinking so that I can get more aligned with that. Or if I know that you're a good colleague of mine and I've offended you by these statements, then maybe next time I'm going to be much more hesitant before I bring this up, not only in front of you, but in front of other colleagues as well. And Nancy's bringing up a good point here, saying a Mercer study a couple of years ago found that people who self-identify as an ally are 6 times more likely to speak up in a situation like this. So that's a really great point. Thank you for sharing that. 6 times more likely to speak up in a situation like that. Okay, things that you would want to avoid. Perhaps the negative joke or comment is made or an act of aggression and you don't say anything about it. Okay, does that silence mean that you disagree or that you agree with it? Okay, perhaps you hear the joke, you look around and you say, well, there aren't really any LGBT people in the room, so I don't need to be that active voice of change. Why don't I just chuckle and walk away or keep my head down or change the subject? Okay, that worry that if you do speak up and say something, what your other colleagues are going to think about you. Okay, and then if we do see it as an act of aggression, something that might harm an individual or endanger them within the workplace, what are your next steps that you can do about this? Okay, this might be outside of your realm. This might be something that needs to be escalated to the executive or HR level if you feel that this is something that could cause an individual harm. And there are different ways that we can set the example. Again, thinking of that peer-to-peer educational moment, okay, that if I am out as an ally in the workplace, I'm a role model for my fellow colleagues, saying that this is something that I support. And hopefully, if they have enough respect for me as a person, as a colleague, they will try to model that. And we know that a large part of that comes from our leadership, so that when we see these message points and support coming from a leadership capacity, that is then something that's going to be embraced by people who might be managed by this person, individual, or group of individuals. Okay, other ways that we can set the example is when we hear that joke about LGBT people, or really any other group, any of our colleagues that we want to support, taking on that responsibility to intervene and stop it, or saying that this is something that you don't agree with because these are values that you hold. And again, the notion that you're silent could imply consent. Okay, so that if you don't say anything, is it just the same as saying, I agree with what you're saying? And really making sure within any workplace environment that there is zero tolerance for harassment and discrimination and any other anti-LGBT behavior, okay? So making sure that people feel safe and protected within their workplace environment. Okay, what are some other things that we can consider? Correcting stereotypes. So if someone assumes that all gay men are effeminate or all lesbian women hold very butch or anti-man behaviors, correcting those stereotypes, again, using that as a teachable moment. Including visual images of the contributions of your LGBT employees. So perhaps putting your LGBT employees in the company newsletter. Okay, maybe an LGBT employee just had a child with their same-sex partner, okay, and giving them congratulations for that within your publications. Again, speaking up and being a role model, so using your language as a way to guide people and individuals in their key concepts and terminology, okay? Just because someone you're speaking to isn't using the right terms, use that and embed within your day-to-day language the correct terms so that people can begin to learn and model from you. Seeing diversity as a strength within a company, which we know that diverse and inclusive workforces are more productive and it has an impact on the bottom line. So not seeing it as an issue, but really seeing and embracing that as a strength. Understanding how one's life experiences can help build relationships. So going back to yourself and your own personal stories and trying to find that common ground. When was the circumstance in your personal life that you've had to overcome and issues that you've brought into the workplace, and really trying to draw those parallels to find common ground and get to know one another. Okay, consistent intervention, making sure that you're constantly looking at the workplace environment and thinking about different ways that you can incorporate diversity and inclusion. This goes back to the use of I statements. So if you're in a conversation and you hear something negative come about, you don't want to do the you should or you should have or you don't. Instead, bring it to the point of your own personal reflection and say, I believe that all of our colleagues should feel safe and protected. I believe in equality within our workplace for all of our employees. Bring it back to your own personal belief system. Okay, and then creating networks and educational opportunities. So bringing together your employee resource group, having cultural competency and those teachable moments, both through training as well as through the modeling of your own behavior. Okay, some different tools for responding. If you're in a scenario where there is a negative comment made or perhaps an act of physical aggression, think about what you can do to make that situation safe for everyone, okay? Not only for your LGBT colleagues, but really a situation safe for everyone. Thinking about how you handle homophobic jokes and comments, even when they're not directed at a specific individual, perhaps as a broad stroke, or joke just against gay men in general, okay? Thinking about how you might respond in that situation and come up with some blanket statements that you can use and pull out if you need to use those in the workplace environment. Okay, if you know someone who's experienced anti-LGBT jokes or comments, perhaps it's the lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender employee, or perhaps it's the ally, it's the mother, the brother, the sister, the father of somebody who is LGBT. How can you let them know that you're on their side? And a good part of that is getting to know getting to know each other as an ally or a friend, sharing your personal story, and creating that safe space within your own work environment. Okay, think about how you confront your own prejudices and phobias. And I know for the people on the call, they might say, I don't have any phobias, I'm not prejudiced. But it's that unconscious bias piece, okay? The 1 million pieces of data our mind processes within 1 second in our unconscious mind, and then the 40 pieces of data our conscious mind processes in 1 second. And using our conscious mind, knowing that we know better to overcome that unconscious bias piece. And then thinking how you signal when it's not safe or an issue comes up. So again, maybe this is a circumstance outside of your control, a circumstance that might cause harm or someone to feel unsafe in the workplace, and how we bring that up to the appropriate channels to protect our LGBT colleagues.
All right, great, Daniel. And I'm going to jump in, and we're going to do a little role-playing now, talking about how you would feel if you were a brand new LGBT employee. So whether you're LGBT or ally, this is kind of a, imagine and role play on this. And you haven't come out yet. You've got a great job. Your boss has been really supportive, likes your work. The company has all the right policies, 100% on the Corporate Equality Index. And you decided it's time, I need to tell my boss about who I am because my life is beginning to get a little more complicated and I want to make sure I can have these discussions. So based on that scenario, do you come out to your boss at this point? And the choices are yes, maybe, no, not sure, prefer not to answer. So there's actually 8 of us on the line. So we've got about 3 of the answers in there. So thinking about this is the time in the job. You may have student loans, you may have lots of expenses and things like that. Do you take this opportunity to come out to your boss? And it looks like we've got a split. About half the people say yes, and then the other half are going maybe, not sure, kind of unclear on that, a little higher coming up on yes now. We'll give everybody another minute or 2 to come back to the answers. So the scenario continues. And you sit down with your boss, you close the door, you say, hey, boss, I wanted to let you know that, it's been really great to work here. I love the company. I want to make a career. And there's an aspect of me that I haven't shared at this point, but I'd like to. And I'd like to let you know I'm lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. So let's talk about the boss's reactions. When you sit down with your boss, you come out to them and let them know. And he goes, great, thanks so much for, consider me an ally. How do you feel? The boss is excited, supportive. What's kind of chat in some of your feelings that you would get at that moment if you came out to your boss, and just go ahead and put them in the box and then hit submit. So the response is very positive. It's very upbeat. You're feeling good about it. You feel safe, maybe relieved. Kind of feeling like maybe that, you've made the right answer. I'm thankful for your support. I feel good being here. Great. And that's the ideal situation. Hopefully everyone's had this training, awareness, and they're really good, and you don't have any issues, and you go on from there, and it's a 5-minute meeting, and nothing more comes out. Coming out is a very personal issue, so obviously, let me see if I see the rest of that. So obviously one that's important there. All right, let's say the boss has a different response now. And this time the boss comes along and you come out to your boss and, that's not something we talk about at work here. I can't believe you told me that. So that's the boss's response. And it's just kind of, why did you tell me that? We don't talk about this at work. So kind of on the opposite extreme. How are you feeling now with your decision of coming out to your boss? And go ahead and chat in your feelings and responses there. And again, your boss is just kind of staring at you going, I can't believe you told me. And go ahead and chat in some thoughts. Maybe now, I thought I was protected, so you could talk about the protections that you have in the workplace. Just kind of stunned, maybe surprised at that responses from your boss. It would increase the stress, and I think of maybe searching for another job. I'd feel uncomfortable and could be a reasonable concern, shocked and a little worried about my career. So a totally different response. Many supervisors may not know that there's even protections in the company, and to talk about that. And so moving forward on that first step of, let me educate you and tell you this. Again, for a boss who may be responding from kind of an unconscious place and immediately coming out with that is like, well, we don't talk about that here. And so we may have to have a little discussion because it comes up. And, again, as my friend in Utah did, saying, well, you do. You tell me about your wife and kids all the time, and I want to be able to do that as well. So you can build that possibly into a conversation. And then one more, and this one is kind of the in-between. Oh, let's see. I missed one there. Okay. The last one was, well, we'll skip that because that didn't come up. So you get a feeling that there's always this risk that comes in for being LGBT and coming out and being an ally. And sometimes in the workplace, LGBT employees will come out to allies or someone they think that is supportive or is part of the ERG and the BRG already. So we're going to talk a little bit about action planning here in our last few minutes. And we're going to talk about 4 different levels, kind of on the personal level, the kind of interpersonal level, interacting with people, the ERG, BRG, and then company-wide. So for you, right now where you are within your company, think about what's something that you want to learn or find out about kind of on the personal level. What's one of your goals for your personal growth? And we're going to, again, have 4 opportunities to do this. One is personal, one's kind of interpersonal, one's ERG, BRG, and one's kind of the company. So at this point, thinking that you're going to move forward on this, what's one thing that you want to move forward now around LGBT workplace equality for yourself? And thanks, Nancy. Nancy, you have to drop off and run to a meeting, so we'll keep it recorded here. Any thoughts on those goals? This is kind of like an opportunity to take and synthesize the entire class and kind of put it into a, what am I going to get there? Giving trainings on cultural competency, in the Czech Republic, moving forward for your own personal growth. Personal development, continue to learn, maybe take some other courses. A lot of times what I ask folks is, what thing kind of said, wow, I don't understand that, or I don't know much about that, what can I learn and do more on? That sometimes shapes, what classes to take next, be it gender identity or allies or ERG, BRG development in areas like that. So again, that's personal growth. Now, what about your professional development goals that you've got for in terms of your career and what you'd like to do on the job yourself? Now, again, this isn't the ERG, the BRG, but what would you like to do in the workplace with your colleagues or continue your professional development goals? And again, just type those in and send them in. I know for many individuals, this kind of course, with the Building Bridges course, could potentially be a professional development goal, or could be on your SMART goals for the year, or maybe to get certified as a trainer, to gain insight on how to deal with people. Great. Push for marriage equality in the Czech Republic. Excellent. All right, to acquire knowledge I need to share. Excellent, excellent. And stay on top of LGBT issues, right? Yeah, we do one of our things that we do for our trainers, we have a monthly trainers forum, and we talk a lot about those issues because it's basically our job here at Out and Equal to kind of be your library and be able to give you that little Reader's Digest synthesis of kind of what's happening in the world so you can take it back to the workplace and your company. Okay, so let's move forward now and talk about what goals are you thinking about if you have an ERG or BRG, or working with others in your company, even if you don't have a formal diversity council or ERG, BRG. Can you start thinking about what are we going to change in the workplace? What do I want to work on next? Maybe we talked about self-ID and maybe we need to push that and have that discussion, or maybe marketing. Maybe we need to go back and take a look at our website. So I want to work with our marketing folks to see what our messages are, or maybe it's recruiting. Do our recruiters understand LGBT issues in the workplace? So what are some of the goals that you want to work in regarding your larger community of LGBT, ERG that you work with? Not applicable in some cases. Bring in cultural competency training like Building Bridges for them, right? Especially leadership. We have several companies who keep a cadre of trainers that works within their ERG, BRG, take these courses and bring it back in, or they have their new leadership when they come in and take over the ERG, BRG, also take the course. And then finally, what needs to change in your company and organization? If you think about what you could start working on. And you know, obviously we could say everybody is accepted and this is a great and wonderful place, but in reality, what are the things that you can work on? It's small steps, it's progress. You know, maybe we need to get our executive sponsor up to speed to understand what's going on, or maybe our CEO or our boss, maybe we'd like to sit down and talk with them a little bit more and explain to them some of the things we learned and how it impacts us, and how things like gender restroom selection and OSHA requirements and EEOC around gender identity, that there's now a legal aspect to that is some of the information that you learned. So any company or organization goals that you might have. And again, as you start to build these and you think about them, you're saying, here's the areas that I see for myself doing a self-assessment that we need to work on and we need to identify, and that maybe I can start to work on and have a discussion. This is never the work of usually just one person. Make sure management understands the business case, right? But usually it's a group of people who begin to have this discussion. So if you haven't got it to the management level yet, it might start with your ERG, BRG, or those other LGBT individuals or allies that you work with. And part of action planning when you start to do this is you begin to see that you're developing new programs and change. What's next for you and your company? Select one of those ideas that you've thought about and select it as your top priority. And then you can begin to present that action to your group or whoever you're working with or management. And a great way to do this is to find a partner in this group. We'll share everyone's emails address if everyone's good with that. And then start being able to talk to each other and find networks and find connections. So those are a great way to do that. And get going on that action plan. So there's lots of opportunities. So Daniel, I'm going to turn it back over to you so we can kind of close that out.
Okay, thank you, Pat. So we've gone over a lot of material in these 3 sessions. Again, with our first part talking about cultural competency and key concepts on sexual orientation and gender identity. We talked about heterosexism, and then we spoke about the phobias, homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia. We then spent some time talking about the business case, why it makes good business sense to create a diverse and inclusive workforce, the policies and benefits that can be put in place to support that, how we support our transgender colleagues in the workplace, and then how we engage both our employee base but also the consumer base. Okay? Today we spoke about how to become an ally and how you might rate yourself on the ally continuum, okay, from awareness to ally to advocate, and different ways that we can go about changing our vocabulary and our actions within the workplace and the best practices to create a safe environment for all of our colleagues to be productive and successful. So how do we put this all together? Okay, some different things that you can do to make your company more supportive for LGBT employees is becoming LGBT culturally competent, which everyone on this call gets a gold star for doing since this is our 3rd session together, but making sure that you're also sharing your knowledge base with your coworkers and management. Okay, it's been very productive and successful all of our time together in sharing these message points, but take it outside of this class environment and continue to have those conversations and dialogues to share that knowledge base. And part of the way you can do that is providing diversity and education for everyone within your company or organization. For those of you who are interested in participating in Train the Trainer in May, that would be a great way to go about doing that and sharing that outward. Okay, making sure that you have the correct policies and benefits in place for all of your LGBT colleagues, supporting laws for LGBT inclusion. If you don't already have an employee resource or business resource group, think about setting that up, or think about ways that you can enhance your current ERG or BRG. And as Pat was saying earlier, always maintaining a commitment to personal growth and professional development. We know that we're continuing to learn and grow every single day, and the landscape of LGBT workplace equality is ever changing and evolving, so making sure that you're staying up to date and maintaining that commitment to personal growth. Now, I want you to take a moment and think about what your takeaway would be from the time that we've spent together, and I'm going to ask you to chat that in using the chat box in the lower left-hand side. We've spent 3 sessions together. What would be one thing that you learned or want to learn more about and your biggest barrier to bring that action plan to work. So think about what your personal key takeaway would be. Is it around embedding key concepts and terminology for staff, maybe helping to spread the business case within your HR or management teams, things around protecting your transgender colleagues or employees? What would be any key takeaways for anyone on the call? Okay, yeah, more education on transgender issues, bringing cultural competency and awareness training to my broader team, completing Train the Trainer, good, we'll look forward to having you on that. Great, thank you. So we have a little bit of time left, and I'd like to open it up if there are any questions. Okay, one more was translating key concepts to my language and explain that, great. So bringing that to a different language base to help spread the message. Corporate cultural competency and practice, we have provided education, but is not supported by management, so sharing that outward as well. Great. Any questions at this time? And if you do have follow-up questions afterward, Pat and I are always available. Our email addresses are up there on the screen, and we can also include them in our follow-up message. Okay, well, we're pretty close to time, so if there aren't any questions here, a reminder that our next class will be our 3-part Train the Trainer series for those of you interested in becoming Out and Equal certified trainers. So that will be a 2-year certification. As we've mentioned before, the prerequisite to that is this Building Bridges 3-part course. And what that will be is a 3-part webinar series on May 3rd, 10th, and 17th, and that will also allow you access to our Trainers Forum. So our Trainers Forum is a monthly webinar. As Pat had mentioned, we do that as our Reader's Digest on LGBT workplace equality, and it also gives you access to our Trainers Forum digital resource archive. And in there we have a lot of our slide decks, recordings to past trainers forums and town calls, so a lot of great resources that come with that if you really want to bring this training into your companies and into your community. For more information, you can always check out the Out and Equal University page online as well, which has a lot of great resources and again archived digital formats and recordings of a lot of our most recent webinars and town calls. We'll leave you with a quote from Harvey Milk. All people, regardless of sexual orientation or identity, deserve a safe and supportive environment in which to achieve their full potential. On behalf of Out and Equal, we'd like to thank all of you for joining us for this 3-part series. We hope that you've learned some information, and we hope that you bring it back to your workplaces, to your homes, and your communities. Thank you all for your time. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.